Good evening. This is Nick Heath from the House of Croft in Portugal. This is the last of the 2020 Harvest Talks. The last Harvest Talk was around a week ago, and I was at Quinta do Rueda speaking to you about the 2020 harvest, which had actually just finished. So we're actually going to talk about something completely different today. But just a few words about the 2020 harvest. It was a relatively challenging year. The yields were quite low. We didn't make as much wine as we expected or wished to, but the quality of the wine that we did make is quite exceptional. Lots of depth, lots of colour, a fair amount of sweetness, as you would expect after the hot, dry year. But all in all, I think we can be very pleased with the quality of the wine that we made. So at the moment, we're not in the Douro Valley. We're down in the Croft lodges in Oporto, in a lodge where we age port in cask. And you can see I'm surrounded by all these beautiful old oak casks. Now, Croft is probably better known for its classic vintage ports, those noble bottle-aged wines. And last time we spoke about the Croft Sericos, the old vines vintage port. And we also, of course, when we're thinking of Croft, we think of Croft Pink, the first rosé port. But this evening we're going to talk about something equally important, which is the Croft aged Tawny. Tawny, as you know, is an expression used to describe the colour of a wine which has been aged in wood for a long time. During aging in wood, the wine will lose its initial deep red, youthful colour and begin to take on the more amber colour that we associate with an aged port. So tawny is an expression that is used to describe the colour of the wine, but it also describes a series of other characteristics: the rich, mellow flavour of an aged tawny, the smoothness and richness of these wines on the palate. Now, wood aging is something which requires a certain amount of skill as well. These wines have to be looked after as they age. The casks themselves are normally around 600 to 630 litres in size. They're made of thick staves of oak, and the casks that are seasoned before the wine is put into them for aging. In fact, one little detail, which is not directly related to port, but related to another fine product produced by Croft called Croft Brandy. In fact, Croft Brandy is actually aged in oak casks which have been used for aging the port. So some of the flavours of port will be imparted to the brandy. But these casks that we see behind me are in fact not casks used for brandy. These are used exclusively for aging port. The casks themselves are looked after by our team of coopers. We have our own coopers. The coopers not only able to make the casks, but they're also involved in doing all the maintenance. Every so often one of these casks has to be dismantled and put together again, and the cooper's job is to make sure that they are in good shape. If we look at the head of one of these casks, what we'll see is firstly a number which represents the individual number of the cask, and we have to bear in mind that every single one of these wines, every single one of these casks has to be looked after individually. So the cellar master has to be able to identify each one of these casks individually. So it's the individual number of the cask here, and at the top you have the capacity of the cask in litres, 625. And below you can see an X with one numeral. Now you'll still see this on many of the casks in the Croft lodges. This is to show the capacity of the cask in the old traditional measures of almuds and canales. An almud was 25 litres, a canada 2. And a cask, the standard cask, is 550. So if we want to know how much wine is in a cask, using the traditional measures, we add 550 litres to the number of almuds and the number of canadas. And here the almuds are 3, so 3 times 25, 75. 75 plus 550, 625. So in fact there are two measures of capacity on each of these casks. Now the wines themselves, we have here three wines to look at. We have a Croft 10 and a Croft 20-year-old tawny, and I'll just lift up one of the bottles for you to have a look at. So you can see the age is indicated clearly on the label. Now 20 years is the average age of the components of the blend which went into the bottle. So the blend had an average age of 20 years when it was bottled. So this is 20 years entirely in wood. And the same, of course, applies to the 10-year-old tawny, which you can see here. So the same information, 10-year-old tawny port. And now, over this period of 10 or 20 years, the colour of the wine will have changed, as I mentioned. The wine will have taken on that wonderful, rich, mellow complexity. And the other thing which will have happened is that part of the wine will have begun to evaporate. So the part of the wine which evaporates, as I'm sure you know, is known as the angel share. So that's the part which literally disappears up through the roof of the lodge. And as a result of this evaporation, the parts of the components of the wine that do not evaporate, which are the flavours, the sweetness, the acidity, become more and more concentrated. So the older the wine becomes, the more concentrated and rich in flavour it is. So you would expect to have more concentration on a 20-year-old tawny than you do on a 10. Aged tawnies are the most versatile ports. They can be served as after dinner. They can be served with an accompaniment with cheese. They make phenomenally good dessert wines. And you can also have them on their own as sort of meditation wines, if you like, perhaps with something to nibble. We have here a plate of dried fruit and some nuts. So I have some dates, for example. And so these flavours will echo to some extent the flavours that we find in the wine itself. As an alternative to the 10 and 20-year-old, we have this wine, which is the Croft Reserve Tawny. It's a little bit less expensive than the 10 and the 20-year-old, but still has a good amount of age on it, and that wonderful complexity and depth of flavour that you associate with an aged tawny port. The other thing is it comes in this very attractive decanter type bottle. So this is one I would certainly recommend perhaps for more casual everyday drinking. Just a note about serving aged tawnies. To bring out the crispness and acidity of the wine, it's sometimes a good idea to serve them a little bit on the cool side. Not chilled, but cooled down to, say, white wine temperature. That will bring out the crispness, the acidity, and give the wine a nice, fresh balance. And actually, aged tawnies, although they're rich wines that you probably associate with sitting by the fireside, actually, if they are served at a lower temperature, make wonderful summer drinking. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to take a glass of a lovely 10-year-old tawny. I don't know if you can see the lovely tawny colour there. And I think what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of a walk through the lodge. And these lodges are very, very impressive. We have thousands of these old oak casks with the wine aging, obviously being looked after by the cellar team. But if you look down all these down the length of these casks, you can get a sense of how much wine we have stored here. This seems to be quite a substantial amount of wine, and of course it is. And the reason for that is you have to remember that if you're making, for example, a 20-year-old tawny, you need to have 20 times your expected volume of sale, plus an allowance for evaporation. And that, of course, means that we have to have a phenomenal amount of wine in the cellars aging in wood. So here we have some individual wines. This one, for example, you can probably see is a wine which has been reserved for 20-year-old tawny. This is a wine from Quinta da Rueda, RDA. It's from 2014, so it's got a while to go before it's used in the 20-year-old tawny blend. And as we go through, we'll see other wines which are used for the croft tawnies. Most of the time, the aged tawnies spend in the smaller casks, where they have the most amount of contact with oxygen. That encourages the aging process. But as they approach the time at which they're going to be bottled, wines from the individual casks will be put together, and at the end of the process, the wine will spend a little bit of time in vat. And just at the end here, you can probably see behind me, we have some of these larger vats, and that's where the wine will end up at the end of its aging process. If we go along to this one here, for example, here we have another Rueda wine. This one from 2017. And again, if you look down, the wonderful view down of these beautiful old vats. So I think that's probably all we have time for. I'd just like to thank you all for joining us again, and hope that you will join us again for future chats about, not about the harvest, of course, but about other subjects which are related to the House of Croft. So, good evening, and hope to be with you again soon.